Hello, Sydney.
Hey, everyone.
So in terms of our introduction, Steve is known as Steve Ops at New Relic, and I'm known as Monitor Jen. And that's not to talk ourselves up. It's actually the relentless work, the passion, and the focus on client problems that we pour into everything we do on a daily basis. And then if you think about what's happening with the Kubernetes world, it's kind of similar. If you forget about the technology for a second and you think about what the clients are doing with a standard Kubernetes stack, they're trying to achieve 3 goals. And I want to talk about that because Steve is going to take you into, he's going to catch you up with what has changed in terms of tracing and monitoring. I'm going to then go into a little bit of cloud optimization for the Kubernetes realm. And thirdly, I want to talk about, purely from a maturity model perspective, what can you do best when you are handling a Kubernetes service. But before I do that, I want to switch back to those 3 goals. So the 3 goals are, firstly, find a market fit for their products and services. The second goal is to ensure they find profitability when they're delivering those transactions. And the third thing they want to do is they want to make sure those transactions are served elegantly so that they don't see a leaky bucket effect. So the talk is geared towards those things, and I want to give Steve the spotlight so he can open it with a quote.
Cool. So one thing that Nick and I do a lot is we actually spend a lot of time in customers' environment, really understanding the tech stack, but also seeing what's coming in the future. So one of the key topics is we're working so much with customers, but we also want to give you a glimpse what's coming, what we see in the next year, but it's also what's going on in the open source world. Now, if you've been to any conference, any events, any meetups, any presentation, you probably heard a word about observability. It's a really big word right now. But if you really really scrape away the marketing terms, the fluff around it, but what it really means is we want to understand the internals of a system using only its external outputs. In fact, what it really, really means is whoever builds the app will probably have better knowledge to actually tell you what they need to monitor in the system. In fact, you probably heard about the term that's given rise of observability-driven development, where in the past, monitoring, it's always afterthought, but when it's done correctly in the moment when you develop app, DevOps, SRE, the process and the responsibility of looking after an environment, it's much easier. In fact, observability is defined in modern control theory. Now, if you ever read about or follow this particular trend, especially open standards is going on in the world of observability, there are 4 key standards that maybe you heard about it. First is Open Metrics. Open Metrics is an open standard of transmitting metrics from an environment into your platform. So currently, it's part of CNCF, Sandbox projects. In fact, I don't know if you know, if you use Prometheus right now, the data format is seeing from Prometheus, it's actually using Open Metrics. So if you're using that right now, you're already seeing that. The second part, we got this a lot of questions during our whole day in the booth. Hey guys, what do you guys think about open tracing? Are you doing anything about open tracing? So open tracing, it's a vendor-neutral tracing API framework that actually came from a principle, from a concept that was written by Google in the Google technical white paper called Dapper by a person called Ben Sigelman. So back then, there are 2 open source tracing formats that come up. One is called Zipkin, and the other one is called Jaeger. So as time goes by, they're now considered as part of the open tracing format. It's part of the CNCF incubating project. Then the third open standard you probably heard about it is called Open Census. Now, Google did a lot of things in the open source world, contributed a lot of things, as one of them is actually called Open Census, which is a set of libraries that Google used to collect metrics and distributed traces. But there's one problem right now. I don't know if you see it. There are too many standards. Now, at the middle of this year, moving towards next year, I'm gladly to say, and also as an industry, we're moving towards open telemetry. So open telemetry is a merger between Google Open Census and CNCF Open Tracing. Not only here in New Relic, we're sharing our contribution because we've been doing tracing for a really long time, but also we're making our platform, our agents. We want to give you the ability to do agentless and agent-based tracing we're going to support big time with the coming release of our agents approximately in the next few months. Now, we talk a lot about concept of tracing, but what really it means? Okay, let me give you a really more relatable example. So some of you here maybe came from Melbourne. Some of you here came from different countries. I say tracing is just like us as a passenger. Maybe I go to Melbourne, to Sydney, Sydney to San Fran. Maybe I want to go to Vegas. I transit another flight. Me as a passenger, I know where I'm coming, where I'm going. So the whole concept of tracing is understanding that original trace all the way to the end user journey. Within tracing, here's an example where open tracing and proprietary tracing can live together in harmony. This is an example where we're supporting open Zipkin tracing format as an example within the UI, but also New Relic tracing together within the same UI. One of the questions that we get asked, hey, can open tracing and New Relic format work together? And the answer is yes. If you need more details, feel free to have a chat with us later on. Underneath the hood, what do we do right here? This is secret sauce that we've been doing for so many years. How do we how does traces interoperability actually works? If you have different tracing format, usually you have what we call a proxy layer to translate one trace format to another one. Currently, people actually use this thing called a B-tree header to actually do that trace propagation. Then you usually have two types of ID, trace ID and parent ID, to correlate all the trace, different trace format. But one thing that I'm also happy to say, we're also doing our active contribution is roughly next year, you're going to start to see a new different type of format called W3C, trace context propagation. Not only we're going to support it big time, but if you're using that in your existing trace format, we can support it too on the platform on the back end.
We're already working on it.
Yeah. But how we really differentiate ourselves and provide value is, hey, you definitely can use trace open source tracing. If you want to use New Relic's agent, that's also fine. But the one we would truly provide value is we provide logs, metrics, events, but most importantly, Kubernetes metadata directly into the trace correlation. Here's an example of a trace that we can see that took 1.52 seconds. Immediately, we can see the correlation within Kubernetes itself directly with that same trace.
So the core objective was to showcase how can you find correlation and causality into a single view. And that's why we decided to at least share with you what is happening in the tracing world and how we are supporting together with technologies that are built with collective intelligence and with the concept of using open source and cloud native incubator projects. So we built this maturity model. This doesn't necessarily apply just to New Relic or a particular vendor. This is more from an education standpoint. This is how you want to design your Kubernetes maturity model. So it starts with various dimensions, just like how Kubernetes is set up. You got control plane, you got the data plane. In the data plane, you have worker nodes. You then have pods. And within the pods, you might have containers that support your application services. So what we do here is follow the same dimensional model. We start with an open source plugin, which is KSM and Prometheus based. That's going to bring in all the infrastructure goodness, compute, storage, and disk. Once you deploy that Kubernetes integration, you can then progress into watching natively what's happening with your scale down activities, what's happening with the pod events, where are you seeing invalid image problems or even image pullbacks because there are problems with those container services. You can then get into the stuff that Steve talked about, which is get down to distributed traces level using an APM correlation layer, which is essentially deploying an agent as a sidecar, mount a Docker volume, or even bake it into your container image. But where you really start to see the best part is when you bring in Prometheus data together with other tools that you might have in your kit. So what we do is we integrate the Prometheus Open Metrics data and pepper it around the traces, around the three-dimensional view, where you go from a telescopic performance view into a microscopic code-level performance view. And lastly, because ultimately there is seed funds, VC money riding on a lot of startup projects, you want to bring in logging as one of your key proof points to be able to see exactly the line of code that is emitting an error or a warning. So that's the last part we have kept here. If you slowly start to build your observability strategy for your Kubernetes service, you could approach it in this way. I want to close it off with, I know we ran out of time. I want to close it off with a really important aspect, which is to reclaim money left on the table in terms of cost containment you could execute for your Kubernetes services as well. So I call this keep your compute lean and keep the planet green, because apparently when you talk about claiming your OpEx cost, it doesn't motivate people enough, so let's do it for the planet. Slightly different spin to it. Still super relevant regardless of the platforms. You are able to directly view your K8s annotation together with your cloud annotations, regardless of the cloud platform you use. And you're able to dissect your data in a way that you could say, show me my certain cluster node group. And then it gives you a view into what are your optimization candidates. So you're literally able to extract this report. This is an open source plugin, and we support it on developer.newrelic.com. So you could literally repurpose the code to be able to work it within your own systems. And what it gives you is we've seen seven-figure savings for some of the larger clients who are cloud native, and they repurpose those funds to be able to do faster delivery to the market, do more automation, and better transaction delivery. So I think we want to provide our counterparts more time for their part of the talk as well. If you found the content intriguing and you want some more details, we'll be happy to share the models with you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.